wilderness for just a little while, a couple of things going on there, backing up just a little, and then seeing what they did when they came to the land of Canaan there. So this week's lesson is Israel enters the promised land, because that's question mark, so it has to go up at the end, promised land. And the reason there's a question mark there is because if you remember what the Bible tells us is that when the Israelites first left the land of Egypt, they went through, and let's actually talk about it. So let's go through what was the sequence of events from leaving the land. You have the 10 plagues. Then what happens next with leaving Egypt and then coming to the promised land? What is the next major event? Okay, good. Parting the Red Sea. They exit Egypt, they part the Red Sea. All right, what's next? Yes, they get the 10 Commandments and the law. And with that, if you remember, Moses is up there on Mount Sinai, and he's up there for a while. And then you have Joshua that stopped about halfway up the mountainside there. And while Moses is up there, if I remember correctly, it was a month or something like that. 40 days. Okay, thank you. So he's up there for a long time. The people down in Israel, the Israelites that are down there, looking at it from a human perspective, not the macro view of looking that they sinned and made the golden calf, but from a human perspective, your leader has gone up on this mountain, and you're seeing the thunder and lightning. And he's gone for a long time. A week or two goes by. You're like, okay, where's he at? And it goes a little bit longer, and eventually you look to his brother, who's been says, all right, what's going on here? What's happening? And, do you just bring us out here to die? All this kind of stuff. And so what Aaron does is he resorts back to the training that he got, whether on purpose or incidentally, from Egypt. And he said, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an image to worship. Now remember, and this is a major theme you have to remember, especially when you're reading the Old Testament narratives, the Old Testament stories there, is that the people back then believed, except for the Israelites, and even then not always them, but the people in the ancient time believed all of the gods were real. The Hittites' gods to the Egyptians, the Hittites' gods were real, the Assyrians' gods were real, the Canaanites' gods were real, and the Israelite God was real. They were all real to everybody, except for the Israelites, and again, even then they, messed up and started worshiping the other gods. But the way they saw it was the Egyptians looked and said, okay, we have our gods and you have your gods, and who is stronger? Most of the time, that was proven through military and warfare. If we beat you, we won because our military is bigger and because our gods are stronger. And so Aaron would have been very familiar with that, living and growing up in Egypt. And so at that point, when they're like, hey, what's going on here? Did Yahweh bring us out here to die? He says, I will give you an image to worship. And so Aaron was not trying to replace God when he made the golden calf. What Aaron was trying to do was saying, hey, we can't see Yahweh right now. We can't see God. We don't know what's going on that mountain. So let me give you something that you can see. Put your faith into this statue here, this situation going on here, this golden calf. And so, again, Aaron wasn't trying to replace God with the golden calf. He wasn't like, here is a new God to worship. This was a representation of God, but as we know in the 10 Commandments, was something that God said, don't do. Don't make any graven image there. And so they received the 10 Commandments and the law. But as Moses is coming down and the Israelites are worshiping the golden calf, do you guys remember what was Joshua's assessment of the sound coming from the camp? What did he say it sounded like? He said it sounds like war. It sounds like chaos. It sounds like destruction is going on down there. And when they get a little bit closer, they realize it wasn't war, it wasn't destruction, it wasn't an invasion. It was the style of worship they were choosing. Now, I'm not going to go into modern worship styles and different things like that, but that's something to think about. That if somebody who has no idea what is going on hears your worship, they hear the song service in a church, or they hear the music that you listen to, and they have no context whatsoever, what are they going to assume that music is for? Kind of ironically, I have some contemporary Christian music. I have one contemporary Christian music station on my presets in my car. Mostly so that I'm flipping through, I got NPR and Now you got to be careful with some of those too. You go through the different ones there, and you hit it, and you wait for a second, and I just sit there and I listen, and the music quality itself is often shallow. The lyrics, if you call them that, the message sometimes can be pretty good there. But there are times as well where I have to stop and listen for quite a while to figure out, is this the CCM? Is this the Contemporary Christian Music Station? Because you cannot tell a difference between other music styles that are out there. And so one way to assess music, or not just music, but worship styles, is to step away from it and say, okay, if somebody heard this worship style without any context, what would they think is going on? In the time when Moses and Joshua were coming down the mountain, they thought they were being attacked and being destroyed. That's the amount of chaos and sound that was coming from that worship style. And they would have learned that worship style from somewhere. They would have learned it from Egypt. And so again, music today and worship styles and different things like that, and this isn't something we're going to spend a lot more time on, but again, taking yourself out of it, somebody listening to that, what would they assume it is? So then after they get the 10 Commandments and the law, what happens next? What is the next major step in the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt? Ron? The big one, they spy out the land. They go to the border and they send in the spies. All right? Do you guys know did I spell border right? I checked on Google and it wasn't really helpful there. I didn't think so. All right, so good. All right, so Google was useless to me when I did this. And I wrote it and I was like, I'm just going to move on. But you know what I'm saying. What does that border mean? Oh, somebody boarding. Yeah, that's totally wrong. That's totally wrong. Anyway, I'll make sure I fix that later. But anyhow, so I am not a good spellerer there. So send out the spies. Do you guys know the Sunday school song about the 12 men went to spy on Canaan? Yeah, let's sing it real quick, okay? Those who know it, let's sing it, all right? Normally in like Sunday school or junior church, you kind of speed it up a little. We're just going to go at a normal speed. And if you know the hand motions, feel free to do it. All right, ready? 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. What do you think they saw in Canaan? 10 were bad and 2 were good. Some saw gradients big and strong. Some saw grapes of clusters long. Some saw God was in it all. 10 were bad and 2 were good. All right, yeah, excellent. There'll be a quiz on that next week. All right, but it's a great song to go through. The 12 men, one from each tribe, was sent into the land of Canaan, and they were told to search it out. And with that, the song kind of gives it away. What was the report? What were some of the things that they saw in the land of Canaan? Okay, they saw giants. Now, this is something that especially when I teach this lesson and talking about Goliath and things like that to children, is I want them to make sure that these giants are not like Jack and the Beanstalk giants kind of thing. They're not 30, 40, 50 feet tall, because when a lot of kids think that, they look at it and say, okay, there's a giant, Jack and the Beanstalk had a giant, they're massive kind of thing. They're called giants because back then the average height of a man was about 5.5 feet tall, kind of thing. That was about average. So somebody that's 6 feet tall or 6.5 feet tall, that person's a giant. All right, that's going to be intimidating to them. And when it comes to battle, especially the way they did warfare back then, face to face with spears, clubs, things like that, swords and axes, the taller you are, the longer reach you have, and the more powerful you're going to be. And so that's a big deal. So some of them, they saw giants that were there. Okay, what else did they see? All 12 men saw these things. Massively walled cities. Yes, walled cities there. Abigail, is that what you're going to say? Oh, okay, what did you say? Grapes, yes. Okay, now, this one also, and no offense to the Sunday school teachers that taught me this, but I was taught that the grapes that they saw, that says in Numbers that they had to carry the grapes on a pole between 2 men because the grapes were so big. And I can remember my teachers saying that the grapes were they were big grapes. All right? So something like this. And if you look up there, these grapes here are about the size of basketballs. Those down there roughly about the size of baseballs. They're big grapes. I'm ashamed to admit, it was not until college that I realized they didn't have basketball-sized grapes. They just had lots of grapes. And so that's what they had there. And so that's what, they had these massive grapes. And we talked about this last week with the land flowing with milk and honey. And I was talking to Joe afterwards that with the flowing with milk, we mentioned that was cows, but more than likely, it probably wasn't cattle. It was most likely sheep and goats. But either way, the picture is still the same there. And to grow this kind of grape cluster would need some very lush ground, very gentle water, very profitable growing seasons. And then when I was going through finding these pictures, I found one by a German artist from the medieval period, and it's very similar to the Tower of Babel. The picture there, it's just great. I don't know how well you can see it, but this guy's hating life right now. Just does not want to be there. This guy seems too old to have been one of the spies. I don't know why they chose him. He should be at home knitting or something. But yeah, so there is, and again, recognize that the picture, I had to zoom in on it, kind of on the top there, it's cut off right now, but there's castles in the back, medieval castles, and you can see the tents there, medieval Renaissance fair type looking tents. Remembering that the people read the Bible during this time, or they knew stories of the Bible, but they've never been to the Middle East, so they didn't know what it looked like there. So they're drawing and painting pictures based off of the cultural images they knew. So that's why they are dressed the way that they are. And so they go, and so we have the grapes, the giants, the walled cities. They say that the land is flowing with milk and honey, and as the song says, 10 of the spies say that they can't do it. We can't conquer the cities. We cannot take the giants. We're not going to be able to do this. But 2 of the spies said, yes, we can do this. We are able to. Now, there are some, I gave one of the answers away right there just a second ago. But right here, 10 of the spies do not trust God. Go ahead. Also, there's another problem, and we're going to turn in Numbers chapter 13 in just a second. So as you're turning there, think about this for just a second. Moses made a tactical and leadership error with the 12 spies, specifically the 10 that gave the bad report. Does anybody know or want to guess what was the leadership error that Moses made with the 10 spies? Well, all the spies, but the fact that 10 of them gave a bad message. Numbers chapter 13 is where we're turning to. So in Numbers 13, look at verses 25 through 29. It says, verse 25, when they, these are the spies, returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where they sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Those are the giants. Verse 29, Amalek is living in the land of Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea, by the side of Jordan. So what is the problem here? And it's in the beginning couple of verses there. What leadership error did Moses make here? Yes, he gave the report of the spies publicly the very first time. Now, the reason that's a problem is because once those 10 spies said, we can't do it, we can't do this, we can't take it over, however many people were there, hundreds, possibly thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of people would have immediately heard that, and the rumors would have spread. Instead, and we'll see this later, and this is the leadership, and I've learned this as I've been in position of leadership with different things. As you are getting information from people, it's best to keep until you can figure out what it is, and not that you're going to lie to individuals or tell them incorrect information, but until you can understand what the information is and kind of evaluate it as the person in charge, you don't want a lot of people knowing that yet. And here, now obviously it was God's plan for them to go through the wilderness and everything, but a lot of things could have happened differently if Moses had taken these men back privately, said, okay, what's going on, and then had a discussion between the 12 spies, Aaron and himself. And because Joshua and Caleb, we see in the verses to follow this, say, guys, be quiet, we can do this. God is with us. And so that's the two that go through and say, we can do this. They say that. They say, God is with us. Look at verse 30. It says, and Caleb quieted the people before Moses. Now, why would why would Caleb have needed to quieted the people? And I don't think he's talking about the spies here.
Well, because they were all upset with the first report.
Yeah. Yeah, as soon as the report was given, the congregation, it says here, erupts. They would have started talking. They would have started arguing. They would have started fretting. Again, Moses brought us out here to die and all these kind of things. Why did God do this? And again, those things are not mentioned in the Bible there between verses 29 and 30. But reading the Bible and thinking about it, having your minds engaged as you're reading, you can see that develop. You can see that happen there. So again, verse 30. And then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are strong for us. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone, and spying it out, is a land that devours its inhabitants. And so that's an interesting phrase there. Also, the land devours its inhabitants. In the previous verses, it talks about the Jebusites, the Hittites, the Amalekites, all these different groups that fight against each other, that are fighting one another there. And that says here, the report is that even the land itself, they devour each other. They destroy each other. This is a hard area. These people are used to warfare. The land devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and are part of the Nephilim. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So, and I am not trying to defend the spies. The 10 men, they gave a report and completely ignored what God said. But again, understanding what they saw and how easy it would have been for them to have forgotten that God had told them they could do this. Here they see the giants, the walled cities, these groups of people that are warring against each other and destroying each other. The Hittites, actually, we're going to talk about them just a little bit near the end. This was one of the first major civilizations to develop iron smelting and iron weapons. And they were, again, we'll talk a little bit more about them. They were modern-day eastern Turkey, kind of north of Lebanon and that area there. And they controlled, and they were a very powerful nation, a very powerful people group there. And those were some of the groups that they were going to have to face, that they were going to have to fight against. But they say, no, God is with us. Joshua and Caleb say we can do that. So we know the next part of the story. God said, all right, none of you all are going to be able to go into the land of Canaan. The only people that get into the promised land from this group that are under the age of 20 are Aaron and Caleb. Not Aaron, sorry. Joshua and Caleb. They're able to go there. And so we're going to fast forward in our narrative 40 years later, where they're taking the land. We believe this is about the year 1400 BC. At this point, things biblically get a lot easier to date because of the talking about in the Bible when they are dedicating the temple. Solomon is dedicating the temple to God. It talks about how long it took to build the temple, and then how long after the years of Egypt, out of the years of Egypt they had been. So it's really easy to date this. So we're pretty confident right around the year 1400 BC that this was taking place. So this is 40 years later that they're going in. And before we go and talk about this, we're going to look at what were the inhabitants of the land thinking. All right, because we always see most of the time see the story from the perspective of the Israelites. We see it from, as we would put it in general terms, the good guys, the children of God going through there. But for a second, remember that the people that they are going in the land the people that are in the land that they're going into are people. They are individuals. They have thoughts, they have cares, and they concerns. So what do you think as this group of Israelites show up back again at the Jordan River? And before we go into there, there's one verse that I want us to read in Numbers 26. So the beginning of Numbers is the law has been given, the spies have been given out there where we first read. But when we get to Numbers 26, this is the end of the 40 years. Oh man, that was cool. Hear myself in stereo. All right. So Numbers 26, this is the end, the new generation. Everybody that was 20 years and older, except for Joshua and Caleb, have died off at this point. Maybe a few stragglers, but most of them are gone. And they're renumbering the people. Now, if you have read through Numbers recently, you know that Numbers 26, 1 through 50 are not very exciting reads. They give a list of the tribe, a couple of the family names, and then the list of people that are there. The tribe, family names, and list of people. So we're going to jump all the way to verse 51 for this. So Numbers 26, verse 51, it says, These are those who were numbered of the sons of Israel, 601,730. So we're going to round it, 600,000 men are there. Men most likely of fighting age. This could be anywhere from starting, we're not sure when they would have looked at it, but 14, 15 years old up. 600,000 men. That's not counting the women. That's not counting children. And so if we consider this as half the population, they have 1.2 million people that are now standing on the other side of the Jordan River. Put yourself in the place of the Canaanites and all those people groups there. You now have a group of 1.2 million people about to cross that river. What are you thinking?
Well, plus was stationed just a little bit north of the Negev, which is very close to Egypt. So saying that they didn't get word of what happened in Egypt before they got to the point where they're at. So they know of the plagues, they know of the parting of the Red Sea and the killing of the Egyptian army. So they're fearful
Yeah.
of the God, of Israel's God.
They might even know what their desire is.
Okay.
Take over the land.
Joe, I think my my clicker, it's not clicking. There we go. There we go. Yes. So Joe Crane up here mentioned they left Egypt through the Red Sea. They didn't go around it. They didn't go up the route that travelers and caravans had taken for generations. They went through the Red Sea. They are less than 200 miles from Egypt. People would have heard about this. Again, we don't know exactly how many people came out of Egypt, but if we know there's about 1.2 million people now, we can assume it was a similar number that came out of Egypt. So 1 million people leaving, their slaves, their workforce leaving Egypt, walking through the Red Sea, remembering they all believe that all the gods are real. They just think their gods, or they hope their gods are stronger. So the God of this slave group parted the Red Sea. They exited out. They would have heard that this God of Israel, again, not that they were looking and saying, I really hope my gods are real. No, they believed their gods were real. They believed Yahweh was real. All right, and they looked and said, Yahweh sent those 10 plagues through there, killed off all the firstborn of the Egyptians. Then when the Israelites left, they went through, and what was left of the army was destroyed by the water. If I remember correctly, 40 years ago, they sent spies through the land, most likely. And now they're here, and as Todd mentioned, they may know also what is going on there. Another thing that like the Israelites, the Canaanites are looking and saying they probably want to come through here. Because they were here 40 years ago, successfully survived in the wilderness for 40 years. The children of Israel knew what that meant. Because when they were out there, they complained numerous times about not having water and not having food. Well, now the Canaanites, And again, this is not a big area. This is like the whole area, the wilderness in Israel, about the size of the state of Virginia. They would have noticed this group of 1 million people wandering around in circles for 40 years out there. They would have known about this. And somehow they're getting fresh water and food every single day to keep that 1 million people group alive. Well, the inhabitants of Canaan know what that land is like. They know that they are not transporting that water. So they also are aware that the Israelite God is keeping them alive. And they're back. They're back right on the other side of the Jordan River, ready to come through. So Joshua, we go now and we see that spies again are sent out. But this time, the strategy is a little bit different. You're in Numbers. Turn to the beginning of Joshua, please. One of the things as people, leaders especially, but people in general, that we should be doing is learning from the mistakes of those that have before us. We learn from the mistakes that they did there, and I think Joshua did that. So Joshua chapter 2, verse 1. It says, Then Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, Go and view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of a harlot whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Then we have the story of how Rahab protected the spies and everything there. Jump to the end of the chapter, verse 23. Then the 2 men returned and came down from the hill country, crossed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they released to him all that had happened to them. So we see here Joshua learning from the mistakes of Moses. He wasn't sure what the report would be from the men that came back, from the spies. Now, he knew that God had promised the land. He knew that they would be successful, but he didn't know what the report was going to be. And so when those men came back, I think he learned from this mistake from 40 years ago. He said, Come to me, give me the report, and then we will go from there. Because if the report, we're going into the land regardless. Whatever you guys say, honestly doesn't matter because God is going to be with us. But any information you give me will be helpful. And so he gives that report. And then we see in verse 24, they said to Joshua, Surely the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of land have melted away before us. Now, how do we know that their hearts are melted? I skipped a couple of verses in the middle of chapter 2 on purpose. Go back to verse 8 in Joshua chapter 2. All these things that we just talked about here, the 1.2 million people, they left Egypt through the Red Sea, they survived for 40 years, they're back, and they're wanting to take our land from us. What are the people of Canaan thinking? We don't have to guess, because we see here in Joshua chapter 2, verse 8. Now before they lay down, she, meaning Rahab, came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know the Lord has given you the land. Now, if you have a King James or a NASB translation, you will notice that Lord there is all 4 letters are in capital. That is meaning that in the original language, they're using God's personal name. So here, Rahab is looking at them and saying, I know that Yahweh, I know that your God has given this land to you. She knows that. She knows that, and people know that. So, as Todd mentioned, the Canaanites know what the Israelites want. They know that this force is going to invade and take over, and they're pretty confident that the original inhabitants of the land are not going to survive. So, verse 9. And Rahab said to the men, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when they came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites. We didn't even mention that here in our lesson. Of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you. For Yahweh your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore please swear to me by Yahweh, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you will also deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and mother, and my brothers and my sisters, with all whom belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So the men said to her, Our life for yours. For if you do not tell this business of ours, and it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land, that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. And so we see here the people of Canaan know what is coming. They know what's going to happen here. Also, we didn't mention this, but I do want to point out real quick. It says that the Amorites, the two kings of the Amorites, were destroyed utterly by the Israelites. Thinking militarily, from the people who just came out of Egypt versus these warlike city-states that they would have faced, take God out of the picture for a moment. Why is this really bad for the Canaanites and everybody else, knowing that this group of Israelites defeated the Amorites? We know that the Lord helped them, but looking at it from a strictly military perspective, why is this a bad thing for the Canaanites? The Amorites were a warlike people. Not that they had standing professional armies, but this is what they did. And they were just beaten, most likely, by an untrained force of recently freed slaves. That's a big deal, because these warlike city-states, that's what's peppered all throughout Canaan. And so if they can destroy those city-states the way they just did, they can do the same thing to us. And they don't even have weapons of war, most likely. They're going through there. They would have been what we would consider during this time light infantry. Later on, we see with Saul and David and Jonathan that there are only 2 swords in the entire army of Israel. And it was probably similar at this point. They would have had slings, they would have had bow staffs, maybe some axes and things like that. But this was a lightly armored army that was here. And they're defeating these Amorites going through. So Israel goes through and they cross the Red Sea. And then because of the age of some of the people in here, I'm going to be delicate with this. But let's we're going to look at what they do real quick right after they cross the Jordan River. So they crossed the Jordan River, and this was actually during the flooding season. The river was not just a little creek. It wasn't dried up, but based off of the time period when it says that they had crossed and went through there, it was most likely flooding. I would have loved to have seen what that was like, because the Red Sea, that would have been amazing. That would have been incredible, because they would have gone through and walked by the walls of water there. We don't know how deep it was, but it was deep enough that when it went back through, it smashed and destroyed the Pharaoh's army and going through there. But here, this was a river. This was flowing water. People downriver were used to the water flowing. So when God stopped the Jordan River, what did that look like? We don't know. Did it stop here and then the water just kind of stopped flowing? Or did God kind of put an invisible dam there and the water kind of backed up here? And then downstream, think about how long it would take 1.2 million people to cross, no matter how wide it is. Even if it's miles wide, that would take a long time for that many people to get across. So that would have been a long time, possibly hours, for that river to have been dried up downriver. And then when God released the water, however he did that, did it kind of trickle back down, or did it flood back down like it did with the Red Sea? We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us, but some things, again, to think about on the grander picture there. So then they go and do something, and Joshua looks and says, God tells him to do this. He says, get 1 man from each tribe and get a large stone from the base of the river. And he says to do this in, I have numbers there, but I think it's supposed to be Joshua. Joshua chapter 4. And so let's look at these verses real quick. Now when all the nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spake to Joshua, saying, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying, take up for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet were standing firm. Carry them over with you and lay them down in a lodging place where you will lodge tonight. So Joshua called the 12 men, whom he had appointed from the sons of Israel, 1 man from each tribe, and Joshua said to them, and then he gives them the instructions to do that, to get the rocks. Jump down to verse 6. Let this be a sign among you, so that when your children ask later, saying, what did these stones mean to you? Then you shall say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off. So these stones became a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. Here we see something that we don't really do much today as modern day Christians. And I think that's because we're been trained, and not in a bad way, but we don't want to avoid idols. We want to avoid worshiping an object or an item. But here we see God telling Joshua, saying, put up a memorial. Put up something so that when later generations look at this that weren't here to see the crossing of the Jordan River, when they see this, you can point back and say, that's what God did. God allowed our people to cross here. And I think there's something that could be said for us today where we could have mementos or small memorials. Again, not that that memorial has any recognition or special part to it, but the idea that as people see that and they ask, hey, what is that? You can say, this reminds me of what God did in my life during this situation. So they get the 12 stones. Then they do what? Once again, it says Numbers, but go to Joshua. Before we read this passage, put yourself, you are a Canaanite spy that is watching the camp of Israel. This 1.2 million group of people has just crossed the river where they should not have been able to cross. They are now setting up camp on your land, and it's your responsibility to figure out what's going on. Joshua chapter 5, verse 1. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings, that's chapter 5. Yeah, chapter 5, okay. And all the kings of the Canaanites were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they had crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. So they're already terrified, they're already scared, their hearts have melted. Now you, as a Canaanite spy, are watching this. At that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make for yourselves flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time. So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gibbeth Heroth. And then it goes through at the talking from verses 4 to 7 that nobody was really circumcised during the time in the wilderness. And so now God is saying, do this. Again, because of some of the age group here, I'm going to be delicate, but at the same time, you're a Canaanite spy, and you start hearing screams coming from the camp there. Lots and lots of screams. 40 years of screams. So you have that going on. And then you figure out why people are screaming. And you realize they're doing this because their God wants them to. Because their God told them to. So you now realize if that's what they do to worship their God, what are they going to do to me when they get their hands on me and I don't worship their God? A terrifying thought. Now, for some reason, this particular chapter never came up during, the Sunday school flannel boards kind of thing, thankfully. But again, realizing, this happened. This was real. And then you see in verse 8, it says, now when they had finished circumcising all the nation, potentially 600,000 men, they remained in their places in the camp until they were healed. Well, I hope so. Okay? Because you think about that and just what was going on there in the camp and the Canaanites seeing that and how long it would have taken for the healing process to finish and all those kind of things. But just a situation there where we've already seen the Canaanites are already scared, and then this happens as well that's going on there. And so an incredible situation that they put themselves there. And so I did not want to end the Sunday school lesson on that. So we're going to talk about what was going on in the greater 1400s. Oh my goodness, I was doing so well with the animation and everything. All right, anyway, it's all up there now. All right, so circa, or meaning around the 1400s BC, the Assyrians are becoming a very powerful nation. Interestingly enough, 40 to 80 years before this, so around the 1500s, Egypt had been the most powerful nation in this part of the world. But something cataclysmic happened that caused them to lose massive amounts of wealth and power, possibly 1.2 million slaves leaving their territory. And so that meant the Assyrians, further east in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, they begin to take over. Mainland Greece begins to strengthen. The people that had migrated there. The nation states are beginning to develop. The ones we know of: Corinth, Athens, Thebes, and Sparta. These places are starting to develop around the 1400s. And then the Hittite nation, as we talked about, the ones that controlled ironworking, and they controlled it very well. So well, in fact, that archaeologists for a long time did not even believe the Hittites were a real people. Going through until they found the archaeological evidence, and they're like, okay, the Bible wasn't lying. Crazy. Going through there. But the Hittites are becoming a nation that ruled modern eastern Turkey and the area there in Lebanon. And so part of the group there, the Hittites would actually be there until about the time of Nebuchadnezzar, when he would come through and finally destroy them. The Assyrians fought against them, the Philistines, the Israelites fought against them, but this people group who had the iron weapons were up there in the hill country, as it says. So next week, we're going to fast forward some and deal with we're not really going to do much with the judges. I do want to mention a couple of them, but we'll deal with Saul and David and Solomon and some of the greater things going on there, and then a little bit of Daniel. But then that'll probably be our last opportunity next week, and then in the fall we'll pick it up again, dealing with a lot of the major and minor prophets, that era there going through. So, all right. Thank you. You are dismissed.